Hi, I'm Noel McCarthy, Professor of Epidemiology at the University of Warwick and Knowledge Mobilisation Lead for the Health Protection Research Unit in Genomics and Enabling Data. This short video is to describe the idea of knowledge and mobilisation in general and specifically as applied to the Health Protection Research Unit in Genomics and Enabling Data. So before thinking of research, let's consider a planning cycle in some other area of society. Perhaps we're running a school or running a factory or any other area where we've got a certain current practice and policy for how we do things. But we want to consider, might we do it better? So we might review that and find some problems or find questions that we need to answer to guide how we run it. Or we might have a plan for a particular intervention we want to try out or a tool we need to develop. So having got that, we will then proceed with some work, perhaps some research work, perhaps implementing our plan or developing a tool. We go on, we have the findings of our research or the tools that we've generated, and then we try these out and see, can the findings help us to change our practice or keep it as it is if it seems to be best, or will the new tools we've developed help us to practice better? And through that continuous cycle, on we go and we get an ever-improving quality of how we do things in our institution. So that's this idea of very much directly commissioned research or tool development or innovation to guide practice. Let's now consider the opposite extreme. Far from being in a particular institution with a practical problem, we're going to look at pure research addressing questions in a specific specialist discipline. If we think perhaps in quantum physics, some search for new particles, there'll be a range of theorists and experimentalists who are involved in that discipline who share a deep understanding of the current problems that are deemed priorities and important questions. They'll do a range of research trying to answer questions or develop tools to improve the quality of their work. We'll have their findings and their products, and these will cycle through that community. And they've quite well established ways of communicating. There'll be specialist journals that people write in the field. There'll be specialist conference. Here are the happy researchers in the post-conference party making their own community in this very defined narrow group. So they've got their own mechanisms of knowledge mobilization. They may be following each other on Twitter to keep right up to date. If we're spreading out from that, we might think of interdisciplinary research, where now we've got the same issue of knowledge mobilization becoming a bit more difficult when we're thinking, how do we get to learn things in related fields that might be of use to us? So there's this increasing flourishing of interdisciplinary journals, this interdisciplinary research centres, interdisciplinary conferences, people taking sabbaticals to work with another discipline to actually learn from each other. But so we see here in this very specialist idea of research getting a deep and full understanding of great craving in humanity, but without perhaps particular applied problems that they're addressing. So let's now consider a situation between the two. Again, on the bottom right, we have our happy band of researchers who are within a specific discipline, perhaps the population genetics of bacteria. There are acknowledged important problems and questions in that discipline. They conduct the research, develop tools to address those, and have this cycle shown here in green, just as in the last slide. But this discipline clearly has some practical application, perhaps in infectious disease control. So there's also a related group of policymakers and practitioners who are conducting their work in the same broad area as addressed by that research discipline. So if the research that's happening here is that sort of more investigator-led research without much direct engagement with the community of policymakers and practitioners who are going to use it, we may then have the investigators doing research that produces new and interesting knowledge in the domain where those people are practicing. So then we'll get this thought of, they've got new knowledge, they want to disseminate it and send it across to the users and write them policy papers or just write their academic papers, but write them in a way that can be used by practitioners and policymakers. And that sense of knowledge dissemination, and if we're writing grants for research, we'll often have to argue how, as well as of interest to researchers, there will be these wider impacts and how we're planning to disseminate that. The focus on knowledge mobilisation in health protection research units is based on the idea that this dissemination model is just not good enough, that it misses out on potentially large benefits from a different approach. if the researchers are developing their questions in isolation and then sending back the results, might those questions be suboptimal? Might they be better questions if they were informed by the expertise of practitioners or policymakers and indeed members of the public who have relevant professional, personal expertise in the area? And as the research progresses and develops tools and findings, might an iterative interaction between the users and the developers result in a better tool for application in research, but also the tool being applied in day-to-day practice? So if we consider instead a single community that joins together the policymakers on the one hand and the researchers on the other, where they have ongoing communication, we get these possible added benefits. We also get the users becoming more expert in understanding research and being able to use it. We get the researchers perhaps being more influential and involved in practice and able to bring additional aspects of their expertise into practice. So in this way, we see perhaps a much more efficient and effective engagement between the research community and the policy and practice and public communities, allowing mobilisation of knowledge. So this changing to an idea of community is really central to the idea of knowledge mobilisation. And for the Genomics and Enabling Data Health Protection Research Unit, that community might include the wider parts of Public Health England who may be users of the tools being developed, other health protection research units, whether they be subject area ones like gastrointestinal infections, or other cross-cutting areas like modelling, where we might do some joint work and apply our tools and methods alongside their models. But clearly it may include people outside the narrow Public Health England Health Protection Research Unit community, other researchers in the wider community, be that international public health researchers and public health bodies, etc. So we've got this idea of community as really central to knowledge mobilisation, relationships, engagement, a culture of joint work, the development of skills that arise out of that amongst researchers, policymakers, practitioners and others, to allow us to best jointly frame research questions, undertake research and ensure that the findings are implemented. But within that community framework, there is a role for that rather specific activities where we bring our awareness of knowledge mobilisation as a priority to bear on how we do our work. So let's think about data sets that we create or collate and that we think might be useful, not just to researchers, but also to policymakers and practitioners. Well, how accessible are those in terms of barriers we put to gain access? Or can we actually actively make them accessible by really good data visualization interfaces to allow a wide user base? And similarly, if we have a new method or tool and we frame that in a good software implementation that makes it easily usable, intuitively usable, well, that's likely to be taken up by a much larger range of researchers, practitioners, or other possible members of the target audience. And indeed, writing has a role, whether that be research paper, policy paper, guidelines. When we're working with this in this community, the hope is that we will also then, when we're writing these items, do it in a way that includes input that will help us to target them better so our messages get across. So here's some examples within the Genomics and Enabling Data Health Protection Research Unit of those additional technologies we can deploy for knowledge mobilisation. So the 4 themes of the research unit are written up here, and I'm going to pick out in relation to 2. First, interface and implementation, led by David Annanson. And here we see a picture of the Prime Minister in New Zealand who's looking at data for COVID in New Zealand displayed on a screen using MicroReact, a visualization interface developed by David Annenson's group that brings together epidemiological and genomic data as an example of reaching out into wider user groups by having good interfaces. And down at the bottom from the outbreak analysis theme of the Health Protection Research Unit, I'm picking out this Transphilo software that has been developed in the past by Xavier Didelot and colleagues who leads this theme as well as the overall HPRU. And in this case, the current work within the HPRU is a publication for this journal, Current Protocols in Bioinformatics. But that's the journal that puts out papers that describe better how to use software and not just a user's guide, but also how to simulate data and try it out on that simulated data so people can learn to use it easily and make sure they're using it properly. So sticking with the Health Protection Research Unit in Genomics, specific plans for knowledge mobilisation include active links with other health protection research units and public health England departments. This idea is, per the last slide, of integrating knowledge mobilisation within each of the teams, training junior researchers who come through so that they frame their questions with an idea of knowledge mobilisation as part of a community that includes practitioners and policymakers as appropriate, and indeed the public. That we also engage in training such as workshops with the broader community, other health protection research units and other parts of Public Health England, so that they can come and gain skills to use our tools, but also guide us in how to communicate and frame our tools to best serve their needs. And alongside these quite strategic planned activities, the idea that our knowledge mobilisation will be opportunistic, where we see opportunities arising and to take them, and also evaluative, that we're continuously monitoring how well are we getting our tools out into the public, whether that be monitoring downloads or other methods to see our impact. So if you're a researcher in the Health Protection Research Unit in Genomics and Enabling Data interested in some knowledge mobilisation, please feel free to catch me. My email's there, n.dean.mccarthy@warwick.ac.uk. And indeed equally people outside the Health Protection Research Unit who are keen to work with us on using our approaches, do please feel free to contact me and we'll see what we can do. Thank you.